Welcome back, everybody, to Between Two Sermons. Great to have you alongside
Good
me
to be
once
here.
again, Rob Catalani.
Penultimate.
Oh, penultimate. Yes, yes. Good job.
What?
That means second to the last.
Right.
Penultimate.
So if you've been in with this series with us, it's been 10 weeks. This is week number 9.
Yeah, and I want to start off today with a confession. I still don't know how to sit in these chairs.
I know.
After this is like the last,
I know.
or second to the penultimate one, and I
right.
can't figure out how to.
Yeah,
do
they're
I
too
sit
hip
like
for us,
this?
I
I know.
think.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is. They're just too hip.
I don't know if I've looked good in it either. But.
Yeah. Anyway, so thanks again, Rob, for leading us in this, and we're now in 1 Peter 4.
Yep.
And talking about suffering. Obviously, we've said this before in the context of this series, like none of us escape suffering in this world. And these are really an opportunity, I think, maybe to summarize everything that you said, to experience Jesus more.
Yeah.
In one form or another, our suffering is an opportunity, if we're Christ followers, to actually do that.
Yeah.
So the first one of your points was we get to experience Jesus with us.
Right. Suffering with Christ.
With Christ, in our suffering.
Yeah.
Expound on that one a little bit for us.
I was saying, as we were talking about earlier today, I mean, I've been a Christian for a long time and in the ministry for a while, and you know this so well. You can, just because you're a pastor or a teacher, there's many things you don't understand.
Yeah.
And I would say this is one of those things that I've read 100 times, but never fully. Sometimes I didn't even know what it meant at all. Like we our sufferings, we suffer with Christ.
Right.
We share in His sufferings. Because I think, well, His suffering was done on my behalf. Atonement. He suffered He died for my sins. He's not asking me to die for my sins. But the concept, as you say, as Peter's trying to say, is, although our suffering isn't the same as Christ. In other words, it's not salvific. My suffering doesn't save someone else's soul, but there is a relationship. The world, because Jesus was the Son of God, the world was opposed to God, and you might say was against God. I'm talking about the world, capital W, the God of this world. It's opposed to the things of God. The world, you might say, crucified Jesus, and was against him. Now God used it, in the gospel for good. It was God's plan. But that same world, what's called evil in the world, is still persecuting or against those who are His living people today.
Right.
So that what it means to suffer with Christ is that we experience some opposition, some difficulty, some persecution because we're Christians. And that's something, especially I think for people in our day and age, in where we do our world, living in America, we don't really think a lot about it, because maybe in other eras, maybe in the early church, maybe in other times in history, other places today in the world, people do suffer because just for the sheer fact that they're a Christian.
Yes.
They literally have, whether it's emotional or physical abuse, and it's for only one reason, because they name the name of Christ.
Right.
And that's what it means to suffer with Christ. And so that's what Peter's saying. And it's something that, even though it's not my daily experience as much as it was for people, I think he's reminding us that we need to understand that, because I think we live in a world where suffering of all kinds is seen as an interruption. It's seen as a necessary thing, but what can we do to minimize it, avoid it, and get back on the right track?
Right.
Of course, nobody wants to suffer, but Peter's trying to reframe it, I think, a little bit for us and say, as Christians, suffering's central to the gospel.
Yeah.
And if we're going to be like Christ, then maybe suffering is part of our lives too.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't like that, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, I want to shy away from that.
Yeah.
I don't want that to be reality.
Right.
One of my best friends is the CEO of an organization that works with the persecuted church around the world.
Okay.
And the stories he has to share about people all around the world, our fellow brothers and sisters, what they're encountering because they follow Jesus
Right.
is humbling
Yeah.
for me. When I hear the stories, I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my goodness, like
Yeah.
the things I think are a big deal are
Yeah.
actually not as huge of a
Right.
deal as I
Right.
think. And there's something about that I think that's also for us in our comfortable state. It's humbling, and we should acknowledge that brothers
Yeah.
and sisters around the world are going through
No,
suffering.
I think so. I think we'd all be better. I would be better if I was more connected to those stories.
And then you said it's our suffering makes us more like Jesus
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, and I think we being Christians, and that point I think we're a little more familiar with,
Right.
maybe even if we don't always live it out, that God uses suffering as a way, not like he sends it, like he's sending it to you.
Yeah.
You know, here's your bad diagnosis. I don't believe that the Bible would affirm that. But because suffering is a part of life, whether it's persecution or hard times,
Right.
it doesn't have to be persecution. It's an instrument. It can be an instrument for our deepening our faith. It's a purifying force, and I do think you see that, you know, even in that strange passage. I don't know, John, if you've ever preached on it. I don't know that I have. For we know that suffering begins in the household of God.
Yeah.
And it can seem so, and you know, if we're barely saved, you know, God help the rest of the world. That's a paraphrase, but it's kind of a sobering verse. But I think the deeper background is saying it's not meant to be fully negative. Suffering begins in the household of God. It's almost like saying with your two children, you know, you might say, you know, discipline's a hard thing, but there were times when you disciplined your kids even though they didn't receive it as love. They thought the opposite. It actually was for their good. I mean, we've all heard this before. But I think what Peter's saying in the larger scope is when he says judgment begins in the household of God, means that God can use suffering almost like an instrument, like a surgical instrument, to refine, to deepen us. And in that sense, suffering, if we're open to it, if we work with it. It says the Spirit of glory rests upon you. That can help mature us in our faith.
Yeah. That reminds me of one of my close friends who has a child with severe disabilities, and him and his wife they've suffered through having a child with severe disabilities.
Yeah, huge.
But what I have seen in their lives, I would never wish that upon them. I would never, ever in a million years, or myself. But what I have seen, how they have approached it, has made them like Jesus in ways that I don't know if they could have achieved other ways. But I look at their lives and I'm like, oh my goodness, you are like Jesus because of the suffering that you've done.
Well, two things immediately come to mind, and it makes sense to me exactly. One is it clarifies or resets your priorities. Like if all of a sudden you lose your job or something, no, that's not good, or you come down with your sickness, or your wife or your husband comes down with a sickness, you know, it immediately resets your priorities. All of a sudden you're this or that or the other thing that are part of your life are less important. Sometimes that's good. Yeah. But the other thing it can do, and I think your friends are a good example, or the friends that your friend knows, or although you mentioned these friends with the disabled child, is it deepens our dependence on God. Right. So I'm dependent on God. I think on my worst day as a Christian, you know, even on my day where I don't feel like I need Him, kind of a day. But when some kinds of suffering comes into my life, I'm hopefully, my inclination is to deepen my dependence on God in a greater way, and that can yield fruit in my life.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's true. It's true. So the last point you made, as you're bringing this home, remind me of your last point.
Yeah, the last point is we suffer like Christ, meaning that part of what Jesus did was, of course, there was an atonement part to his suffering, but there was also a, modeling that he turned the other cheek. He didn't retaliate. He demonstrated a quality of life in his suffering when prior to the cross, so that we can. He says, I think the last verse says, "Therefore we suffer according to the will of God," and then he says, that means we can trust our Creator, entrust ourselves to God, and continue to do good works, so that I can suffer like Christ. How can I do that? By maybe your friends are a good example. By when suffering happens to me, I don't complain, I don't freak out, I don't become point fingers or anxious. I kind of receive it, depend on God, and I demonstrate. I demonstrate in the face sometimes of difficult things that God is my Savior, my Lord, and I'm trusting Him even in hard times, and that's doing good.
Yeah.
And that can have an impact on people.
Yeah, or even as Jesus didn't ignore suffering. He didn't act like, oh, this isn't happening.
Right.
Like, he acknowledged suffering, and he said, I really would prefer not to go through this. Like, I think of Gethsemane,
I know, it's a great example.
Like, I don't want to do this.
If there's a way out,
yeah,
I want it.
Let me out of this. If you can get me out of this, please do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's okay for us to realize that Jesus' example is that, too. It's not just this defeatist mindset of like, oh, I'm just going to grin and bear it. It's like, no, Lord, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to tell you what I really
I didn't
want.
think about it till you mentioned it, and I know we're out of time, but because the last verse says, we suffer according to the will of God, and that's exactly what Jesus says.
Yes.
Not my will, but your will. So it's a great way to think about that. I didn't think about it until you said it, that, what does it mean to suffer according to the will of God? At least in that one case, Jesus uses that word. It's to do things you absolutely do not want to do. Even the great Jesus said, if there is a way out of it, get me out of it, but not my will, but yours be done. But of course, tremendous good came out of that.
Best of all goods. But it was still suffering.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Rob, for leading us through this. Fantastic conversation today. And I feel like we could go on for another hour about this. But for you at home, whether you're with your small group or just by yourself, I think one great question to reflect on was one that Rob actually shared in his sermon. How has suffering, your experience of suffering, made you more like Jesus?
Right.
How has your experience, and like we said, none of us escape suffering. All of us have gone through it in one form or another. How has God used that in your life to actually make you more like Jesus?
And I think you could ask that question whether you've been a Christian for a year, or 30 years, or so it's a great question to look back on. Maybe it's you don't need to be a Christian for a long time to think about that. Definitely.
So thanks again, Rob. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you back here for the final episode of this series of Between Two Sermons next week. Have a great week.
All right, Rob, you gotta find us a